welcome 2025 AERA Annual Meeting Presidential Program Chairs, Catherine C. DiMartino, Huriya Jabbar, and Lorena Yosa.
Welcome everyone to a truly significant moment of the 2025 AERA Annual Meeting, the Presidential Address. It is with great pleasure and deep respect that we introduce to you visionary scholar, dedicated leader, and esteemed president of the American Educational Research Association, Dr. Janelle Scott. Janelle's journey in education has been one of profound impact and unwavering commitment. Janelle was an elementary school teacher in Oakland, California. After receiving her PhD in education policy from the University of California, Los Angeles, she became an assistant professor at New York University, that's where we met, and later joined the University of California, Berkeley School of Education. In her current role as Distinguished Chair in Educational Disparities and Associate Dean for Students in the College of Letters and Science, she consistently demonstrates a profound commitment to understanding and addressing critical issues in education. Janelle's contributions have been widely recognized. She's an AERA Fellow, a member of the National Academy of Education, and a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. She received an AERA Distinguished Scholar Award in 2014. We are truly fortunate to have Janelle at the helm of AERA at this pivotal time. Her exceptional leadership and profound dedication to our field are undeniable, evidenced by her extensive service within our organization. From her impactful leadership of Division L, to her crucial roles on the AERA Council and Executive Board, her commitment to AERA has been steadfast. AERA past president Sean Harper, reflecting on their shared service, spoke of a beautiful friendship that will surely endure for decades. Preston Green from the University of Connecticut shared his immediate impression of Janelle. He said, "She's the real deal." He went on to say, "She is the gold standard of our profession. She's an amazing scholar, mentor, and leader. She's also a good human." As her former colleague and friend, I couldn't agree more.
Janelle's novel research has had a significant and lasting impact on the field. As Sonia Douglas, professor at Teachers College Columbia and one of Janelle's collaborators, said, Janelle Scott's legacy is defined by her groundbreaking contributions to educational research in the areas of policy and politics, and her steadfast commitment to using research evidence to transform education in schools, districts, and communities across the US. Janelle was first in a line of scholars to identify the emergence and consequences of venture philanthropy in education, providing the conceptual basis for so many other scholars in political science and educational policy who've continued to study this phenomenon empirically. And this groundbreaking work is what attracted me to Berkeley to pursue my PhD under her supervision. Gary Anderson, professor emeritus at New York University, described this work as, quote, a landmark in the research on the influence of dark money in education. He added, Janelle was among the first to draw back the curtain on early oligarchs and their inordinate influence on education policy. Janelle is one of the most creative scholars in the field, one who never loses sight of the so what, focusing on the deepest fundamental issues in society in ways that are, as she would say, timely but not trendy. As collaborator Liz DeBray from the University of Georgia says, Janelle is a visionary. She deeply values her elders in the civil rights and educational policy fields while simultaneously inspiring and mentoring younger scholars.
The threads of Janelle's research and her intellectual influence are apparent in the work of her mentees. Those of us who have had the good luck and fortune to work with Janelle, as both Huriya and I have admired how she encourages people to take intellectual risks and trust our hunches, even, as she has said, if the field hasn't quite caught up to you yet. For this excellent mentorship, she was awarded a Distinguished Faculty Mentor Award by the University of California, Berkeley. Maria Elena Rivera from the University of Texas at Austin described Janelle's mentoring as a model for kind, wholehearted, and inspirational scholarly development, emphasizing how Janelle fundamentally changed the way I think, not only about educational policy, but actually the way I think about myself, my own abilities, and what is possible in the world. Janelle strives to create scholars who are nuanced in their thinking, encouraging them to pursue research questions that address broader social, political, and economic significance, with a strong grounding in race, class, and gender. Her mentorship is not transactional or fleeting. It is relational, grounded in care and trust. As Chris Lubienski from Indiana University noted, Janelle is a model of both intellectual curiosity and rigor, and her passion for socially just education is an inspiration for the next generation of scholars. We truly cannot think of anyone better suited to lead an education research organization during this time. As Amy Stewart Wells from Bank Street College of Education, past president of AERA, and Janelle's longtime mentor and collaborator described, for those less passionate about social justice than Janelle, her piercing questions can make them exceedingly uncomfortable. And that is why it is so important that Janelle plays the leadership role that she does in our field, particularly at this moment in our history. It is with great pleasure and admiration that we introduce a remarkable scholar, leader, and mentor, our dear colleague and our cherished friend, the 2025 President of AERA, Dr. Janelle Scott.
I'm a little overwhelmed. That was beautiful. Thank you all for coming, first of all. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Just going to take this in for a minute. Give me a second. Wow. Thank you. So as we gather here tonight, we're mindful of all that is challenging in our social worlds: war and devastation, rising global anti-Semitism, humanitarian crises in Gaza, Congo, and the Sudan. Schools and universities and researchers, students and educators have endured deep harm. There are environmental crises around the world leading to displacement, suffering, and conflict. As we grapple with pressing challenges and multiple crises, particularly attacks on migration, immigration, the rising political polarization, the ongoing effects of the pandemic, and the attacks on the core tenets of our field in terms of teaching, learning, and the social and emotional development of young people and adolescents, we also come together to talk and learn across differences and build together. We're not just observing these crises, we're deeply affected by them. I hope this meeting so far has brought opportunities to engage with each other across professional and generational status, AERA divisions and SIGs. I hope that it's brought openness to making new connections, even as you enjoy your time with those you already know and love. Our phenomenal opening band. So I called Marvin. Marvin, I don't know when I called you, like a month ago, and said, can we put a band together? And I just said, could you do this? And Marvin was like, yes, we can do this. Marvin, I so appreciate all the work that you put into that. It was beautiful. I was listening backstage. He did not hesitate. I specifically said I wanted the members of the band to be AERA members, to show our multiplicity. We contain multitudes as researchers. So thank you so much, Marvin, and Dakota and Kimberly White-Smith and Walter Gershon and the Pure Soul Band. Their performance exemplifies the hopes we had for this meeting of our community coming together and creating and collaborating and connecting, insisting on joyful expression amid devastation. Before I begin my talk, I want to offer gratitude to everyone who has helped to make this conference so meaningful. Of course, top of mind is Dr. Felice Levine, who has led AERA for 23 years through difficult times and times of plenty. Felice, we are so grateful to you and all you have done to help AERA grow and thrive, for all you've done to promote the role of education research and scientific knowledge, and everything you have done to mentor the countless researchers that you've encountered across their professional lives. We're so excited to welcome Professor Tabby Chavez as AERA's next executive director. Thank you, Tabby, for agreeing to serve at this critical juncture. We're so grateful and fortunate to have your wise leadership. I offer gratitude as well to Deborah Ball and Naila Nasir and the entire search committee for all the hard work you did to ensure such a wonderful result. And AERA Council has been an incredibly dynamic body this year. I'm so grateful to council members and all who have served on our many AERA governance committees who have been doing hard critical work this year. Thank you for your leadership and courage and joy. Thank you also to the AERA staff who have been incredible. I'm so grateful to them for their hard work, their professionalism, and their humor. They lead our many programmatic initiatives throughout the year and work incredibly hard to execute this meeting. I'm so thankful for past President Tyrone Howard, whose stewardship and advice I have leaned on heavily this year. Thank you, Tyrone. And to President-elect Maisha Wynn, thank you as well for your kindness and your wisdom and your discernment this year. We're so excited for your leadership, which commences on Sunday at 4 p.m. Nobody's counting. I also extend my deep appreciation for all the advice, encouragement, and support offered by so many past presidents, especially Vanessa Siddle-Walker, Amy Stewart-Wells, Sean Harper, Deborah Ball, Vivian Getz, and Carol Lee, Chris Gutierrez, and Rich Milner. And if I forgot people, I'm so sorry. I am grateful, but I'm stressed. Okay. I also want to thank Jenna Johnson-Hanks, the Executive Dean of the College of Letters and Science at Berkeley, along with my colleagues there for their patience this year, and Dean Michelle Young and my colleagues at the Berkeley School of Education. And to my wonderful AERA co-program chairs, Catherine DiMartino, Haria Jabbar, and Lorena Yosa. They're phenomenal scholars and just fundamentally good people. I'm so grateful that they agreed to take on the planning of this meeting with me. We've had fun, we've had hard meetings and hard decisions to make, but through it all, they've been brilliant and kind and creative and simply just phenomenal. I want to also thank their deans, Jack Knott at NYU, Pedro Noguera at USC, and James Wolfinger at St. John's University for the flexibility they provided them this year so that they could do this work. I'm so grateful to all my research collaborators who I count as colleagues and dear friends. I continue to learn and grow as a scholar because of our shared work. And finally, I'm thrilled to have my family here tonight. Thank you to my husband and my children for being here, and really for everything. Okay, so now we're gonna start this page. So, as I indicated, we're coming together in a time of deep uncertainty for the United States and for the world. Our field is also experiencing profound uncertainty as federal actions target core tenets and concepts in our work and engage in the mass defunding of education research and research infrastructure. There have been immediate effects, some of which many in AERA have experienced personally. There have been a set of coordinated resistance efforts, but we are grappling daily with new directives, new cuts, new ways to attack the core foundations of the knowledge we hold as a field. In the meantime, children, educators, adolescents, and adult learners, and so many more are being harmed, and the harms are getting more widespread and more severe. In this time of profound rupture, we are afraid and we are anxious. We're hoping we can reverse these actions. We want to minimize the damage. We want to protect the vulnerable. We're caught between powerful tensions. On the one hand, we want our research to have broad and deep reach in communities, legislatures, schools, and colleges, and universities. On the other, we're experiencing the risk and fear about how our research has been targeted with censorship and defunding and retaliation. Many in our community are deeply affected by the termination of their grants and contracts such that they weren't even able to attend the meeting this year. Graduate students and early career researchers are looking with deep concern about whether they will be able to pursue careers in research, in academic or other settings. At times, it might feel like our research doesn't really matter to this moment. I take it as axiomatic that our research does matter. And I want to talk about how and why we must think about our connections to each other and how they can strengthen not only our response to this moment, but how our research can contribute to making sense of the ruptures over the last 5 years and indeed the last 50+ years. I hope my comments help to contribute to a vision for what is a still unknown future, where education is part of reimagining and rebuilding a holistic, healthy society and equitable multiracial democracy where everyone belongs. These are lofty hopes, but I am mindful that my life and the opportunities I have enjoyed were made possible by my ancestors and broad social and civil rights movements built on hopes and ideals they had no reason to believe would become possible. And indeed, what we achieved came at great cost, stumbles, setbacks, and sacrifice. None of us alone or within our social bubbles can intervene on the attacks on democracy, but together we can reflect and restore our connections to each other and learn from our different scholarly standpoints to resist and reimagine. So I live in the Bay Area, California, one of the most beautiful places in the world. Among the natural beauty in the Bay Area is an abundance of redwood trees. I start tonight with a meditation on these wonders and how they invite us to see ourselves and our relationship to each other, our communities, our work, and the world. Not only are these trees beautiful, but they are the tallest living trees on the planet, found along the Pacific coast as far north as Oregon. In California, we have coast redwoods and the giant sequoias. Scientists trace their lineage to millions of years, some lines to the Jurassic period, and some trees have lived for over 2,000 years. Redwoods, though sturdy and majestic, have shallow root systems, but what they lack in depth, they make up in breadth. Root systems can spread out over 80 feet, and key to their strength is that the trees interlink with each other's roots, to keep them sturdy and grounded to earth. Their bark and foliage provide protection from fire, and the trees contribute to the surrounding ecology. According to the National Park Service, the most important environmental influence upon the coast redwood is its own biotic community. The complex soils on the forest floor contribute not only to the redwood's growth, but also to a verdant array of greenery, fungi, and other trees. A healthy redwood forest usually includes massive Douglas firs, western hemlocks, tan oaks, madrones, and other trees. Among the ferns and leafy redwood sorrels, mosses and mushrooms help to regenerate the soils. And of course, the redwoods themselves eventually fall to the floor where they can be returned to the soil. My family has hiked in many parts of the Bay Area. This is the children when they were little. Miles said it was okay, Julia. So redwoods are plentiful, but we especially enjoy Muir Woods, a National Parks Service site. In the same way that the trees protect each other and help to generate, I want our education research community to consider how we might emulate and learn from this ecological model in this time of challenge and uncertainty and crisis, turning toward and nurturing our own biotic community. In creating the theme for this year's meeting, I had the input and support of so many. It included my program chairs, council members, close colleagues, who helped give life to what became a powerful call to our field. Collectively, we hoped the theme would generate scholarly engagement and critique, and that AERA members would feel seen by the call. We decided to invite proposals for the presidential sessions, which isn't usual, that would take up this vision of a multidisciplinary, multi-generational, and multi-method engagement to learn and strengthen our scholarly understanding of complex issues in education research. We were so gratified to see the creativity and the imagination from the over 80 proposals we received. Too often, we're separated by our methods, our ways of knowing, that prevent us from fully marshaling the knowledge base of our field, not just to resist the attacks on it, but to better construct and sustain quality education across the lifespan. This is how I see the beauty and potential for repair within our broader community. It's part of our structure in AERA that we even organize ourselves into what we call divisions, where our scholarly silos can become barriers to learning across domains. At times, the pursuit of individual achievements and the reification of knowledge hierarchies have affected how we know, how we study, whose work we read, and whose work we absorb. We're a field of specialists, despite our inter and multidisciplinary grounding. From our standpoints, we are often in the position to say something about the application of knowledge. The knowledge we produce can inform remedies for inequality and discrimination, but we're also segmented, and our emphasis on knowledge domains limits us from seeing across the research toward holistic understandings. So as we grapple with the current, recent, and past ruptures, a more integrated field in which we come together to affirm the core questions and analyses of our field is deeply necessary to sustain ourselves as researchers, but more importantly, to have our research contribute to a healthier social ecology. I had this modeled for me through the teaching of Mike Rose while I was in graduate school at UCLA, in what the young people might call the late 1900s. Mike agreed to work with us, a few of us, over a summer to read across foundational texts in the learning sciences, anthropology, measurement, cultural studies, critical race theory, policy studies, leadership, and to then try to write analyses from our domain of study that integrated the awarenesses we gleaned from this reading and discussion. It was a phenomenal experience that has shaped the trajectory of my career in many ways. And so from this model that Mike established, I think that those of us who are fortunate to call ourselves education researchers must turn toward each other and toward each other's work to intervene on and withstand the ecology that has caused such rupture, and consider how we might remedy and repair the production of inquiry and knowledge to improve education. In so doing, we might create research in the spirit of the Black educators that Vanessa Siddle Walker wrote about in her brilliant trilogy, who insisted on educating students to reach their highest potential in preparation for a world that did not yet exist. The world where research and social scientific knowledge are valued by policymakers has been ruptured, and as we resist, we must reimagine how, with whom, and for whom we do education research for a world that does not yet exist. In our collective resistance and rebuilding, I hope that we could be more inclusive than we were in terms of whose knowledge mattered. In so doing, we might engender what Sylvia Wynter called a new intellectual order of knowledge, referencing the understandings and awarenesses born out of the civil rights movement that produced women and gender studies departments, ethnic studies departments, and African American studies departments. So I'll first offer some ideas about where we are and how we got here, and then offer some possible models for how we might more effectively, collectively, respond to the multiple crises we are facing. And as I often do in times of joy and pain, I come back to the redwoods here and there to see what they can teach us. So to engage in collaboration or repair or remedy, we must first acknowledge how recent and historical ruptures have destabilized us and revealed how existing injustices manifest across social domains, and how perhaps we've neglected to apply what we've learned and know in ways that address and acknowledge the scale of harm and loss. I take inspiration for thinking about rupture from Hartman, who in writing about the history of the transatlantic slave trade, coined the term the afterlife of slavery, referring to how this horrific rupture that dehumanized slave owners and enslaved people manifests in institutions, social structures, and Black lives. Hartman explains, racism is a distribution of death, controlled depletion, and a brutal allocation of chances at life. To truly abolish slavery, abolition requires uprooting the order of value and overturning the vertical order of life that created the system. Locating her analysis in the freedom dreams of the formerly enslaved, while also recognizing that some ruptures are so devastating that their full repair may not be possible, but the insistence on recognizing the rupture is what creates the powerful conceptual and political possibilities toward understanding the durability of injustice. In their study of Black and Indigenous youth experiencing push-out in school, Nixon, Habton, and Tuck take up Hartman's work and find the assumption of repairability lends itself to the idea and creation of task forces, committees, and the production of extensive documentation destined to overburden Black and Indigenous people charged with providing the labor required to address these systemic and deeply embedded issues. Sorry, I want to move to Toni Morrison. So scholars of politics like Timothy Snyder have long been ringing the alarm over the last decade about the signs that the US was sliding into the acceptance of fascism, authoritarianism, and on its way to becoming a kakistocracy, government by the unqualified, ultimately becoming a country shadow ruled by billionaires who controlled electoral politics and therefore political processes. Attacks on higher education are happening because independent knowledge, evidence, and expertise are one of the many tactics of these ideologies. We must also understand our current politics as deeply nested in fundamental questions about race and racism and ultimately who belongs in the United States. For example, long before this current moment, the novelist Toni Morrison wrote about the connection of fascism to racism. She wrote, "It is recognizable by its need to purge, by the strategies it uses to purge, and by its terror of truly democratic agendas. It is recognizable by its determination to convert all public services to private entrepreneurship, all nonprofit organizations to profit-making ones, so that the narrow but protective chasm between government and business disappears. It changes citizens into taxpayers, so individuals become angry at even the notion of the public good. It changes neighbors into consumers, so the measure of our value of humans is not our humanity or our compassion or our generosity, but what we own. It changes parenting into panicking, so that we vote against the interests of our own children, against their health care, their education, their safety from weapons. Similarly, in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, about his frustration with the lack of commitment to full racial equality from moderate white supporters. He wrote that while many were willing to stay the course and consider issues of fair housing, voting, and employment rights, that the tide was turning on support for the full realization of civil rights. He said they are balanced at the other end of the pole by the unregenerate segregationists who have declared that democracy is not worth having if it involves equality. The segregationist goal is the total reversal of all reforms with the reestablishment of naked oppression and, if need be, a native form of fascism. And so we must remember that the ideological road to this, sorry, I lost my place, that the ideological road to this movement was paved long ago, and the U.S.'s failure to reconcile the history of enslavement and indigenous dispossession is feeding this moment, even when it goes unnamed by political analysts or advocates. It's also important to remember that not all ruptures are negative. The concept of rupture can also hold positive implications. The first Reconstruction after emancipation aimed to integrate Black people as full citizens. These efforts were quickly dismantled and met with violent backlash. The second Reconstruction was the mid-century civil rights movement, which produced jurisprudence that overturned the Plessy doctrine of separate but equal and passed major civil rights legislation like the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Acts that greatly advanced equity and opportunity. And Robert Cotter talks about the significance of Brown for overturning this logic. So we pass a whole slate of legislation in a very short amount of time, given our nation's history, that was so successful that the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized by a bipartisan Congress in 2006, not that long ago, and they offered a 25-year extension. But in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled in Shelby v. Holder to dismantle Section 5 of the law, which prohibited most former Confederate states, along with Alaska, Arizona, and some other local jurisdictions, from enacting new election laws or local ordinances without seeking federal permission first. Since 2013, at least 31 states have enacted at least 103 new restrictive voting laws. So together, this work on recognizing and tracing endemic rupture while also considering possibility and limitation of remedy and repair might frame how we think about our past and present and future together. So let's talk about the present for a minute. We're all too aware of what the present is, but this sort of exemplifies it. Federal actions over the last 3 months have affected educational research and P through 12 education. The federal role in education, of course, has evolved and is imperfect, but has generally performed important functions through resources for multilingual students, students living in poverty, students with disabilities, and students facing racial and gender discrimination. As we know painfully, the federal government has been a major funder of research and data that is used by researchers, journalists, and members of the public, requiring rigorous peer review that emphasized trust and scholarly and research expertise. So I know this is hard to read, but I'm going to tell you what it is. So it's hard to keep up with the federal actions. I will note a couple of data points. According to Inside Higher Ed, some 1,500 students at over 240 universities have had their visas revoked or their legal status changed. Professor Christina Pagel has developed a helpful categorization of the federal actions, concluding that they fall into the categories of 1, undermining democratic institutions and the rule of law, 2, suppressing dissent and controlling information, 3, attacking science, environment, health, arts, and education, 4, aggressive foreign policy and destabilization, and 5, dismantling social protections and rights, coupled with enrichment and corruption. These focal areas are particularly destructive because we're still reconciling with the loss and traumas of the last 5 years. The pandemic, the rise and fall of the Black Lives Matter-led racial reckoning movement, and the effective backlash that focused on schools and colleges and universities. So let's go back 5 years. This year, we commemorate the 5th anniversary of the onset of the pandemic. 5 years ago, under the leadership of then-President Vanessa Siddle Walker, we canceled the annual meeting of AERA, due to the pandemic for the first time since 1946. And we learned to navigate remote education and work while also navigating parenting, illness, and death in the midst of a failed federal response that left states and localities and communities to largely fend for themselves to mitigate the spread of the virus. The pandemic coexisted with and has magnified existing inequalities and crises, as we all know. These crises include climate change, constitutional crises, racial, gender, and religious-based violence, school shootings and gun violence, environmental crises, and ongoing war, and rising fascist political movements around the world. If you recall the beginning of the pandemic, I'm not sure if you can see these screenshots, you had this outpouring of support for teachers. And so Shonda Rhimes tweeted, "Been homeschooling a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old for about 1 hour and 11 minutes. Teachers deserve to make $1 billion a year or a week." But there was a real public discussion about issues of educational inequality, the importance of teachers, the need to address race and racism. There were moves to expand school choice policies. There were efforts to provide supports for working families and families living in poverty in some communities. And it became very clear the relationship between family income and wealth and students' opportunities to learn when learning moved into people's homes. We also started to have conversations about how segregation and other health issues were related in the context of schools. So toxic school buildings that are bad for children's learning and development. We started to have conversations about that. But we were doing this in a state of grief, and many in our community lost loved ones and family members. And I've been long concerned about how our field seemed to have moved on from that point. And we've become focused on the effects of the pandemic through very specific lenses of learning loss or chronic absenteeism, without really, I think, really digging into what families and communities are continuing to go through in the aftermath of the pandemic and the racial justice movement. So even in this prolonged era of crisis, I do believe that there are spaces and opportunities for us to resist and reimagine, ever mindful of the enormity and seeming impossibility of what we face. Just as another data point, this is produced by a research organization that overlaid COVID contagion rates. That's the map on your right. With historical redlining maps in the Bay Area. And you see that the people made most vulnerable are in historically Black and Latinx neighborhoods. And so the geography of opportunity related to public health as well. As a reminder, the US had over 100,000 cases of COVID and over 1 million people died. And I continue to wonder if our field has fully grappled with this scale of loss and what it means for schools and communities and colleges and universities. And we also have data on what COVID did to create orphans. Global estimates estimate that approximately 1.5 children around the world lost at least one primary or secondary caregiver. Updated data show that 10.4 million children lost a parent or caregiver, and 7.5 million children have experienced orphanhood. And as we've moved on, we see that our moving on has had costs. Child poverty has increased from when we were providing additional supports to families to 2022 and 2023, where you see the rates of child poverty just skyrocketing. As our students returned to school, they also faced violence. So school shootings, as you see, shot up in 2022, dramatically. And so the death rates and injuries are horrific: 142 people killed and 386 people injured from school shootings since 2018. Environmental crises have also kept students from school. Estimates are that 123 million students have been affected by environmentally caused school closures. And as we know, there's been an increase of legislation targeting targeting trans students and the LGBTQIA+ community. In 2025, there are 857 bills under consideration across the country that would negatively impact trans and gender nonconforming people. This number is anticipated to grow. So I want us to try and hold these environmental and health issues constant with how we think about what we should care about as we study education. And I really think it requires us to talk to each other about what we know and how we know it. We also know that in the midst of recovery from this pandemic, there became a backlash against teaching and learning, largely led by this fine citizen who worked with allies to raise the alarm that critical race theory was being taught in elementary school, and was very public about the strategy to use it to turn it toxic and put all the various cultural insanities under that broad category, including the attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion that we're dealing with today. PEN America has been tracking book bans by states, and as you can see, there's some hot spots. Hello, Texas. So I think that we can benefit, and I'm speaking from my standpoint as a policy and politics of education scholar, from considering insights from the study, considering how insights from the study of the politics of education can help explain how we got to the point we find ourselves in, and offer us clues and cues about how we might reorient ourselves. As researchers, you might not be into the politics of education, but to paraphrase a common saying, the politics of education are definitely into you. So, as I've discussed, a major thrust of the mid-century civil rights movement was to make public education more equitable, while also pushing for full citizenship rights through the passage of key federal legislation, the pursuit of school desegregation and funding equity. In many ways, that legislation was successful, not totally, and there's deep and broad room for critique. But by 1989, the Heritage Foundation had grown concerned about the success of the civil rights movement and convened to develop a response to the achievements of the civil rights movement. So, at this convening, the Heritage Foundation came up with a 5-point platform that they wanted to see actualized. The first proposed an Economic Liberty Act that would require all levels of government to ensure that their regulations provide access to entrepreneurial activities for all citizens. Next, redefine affirmative action to mean providing minorities and the poor with the tools necessary to participate in the mainstream, such as job skills, literacy training, daycare, and transportation. Promoting choice in education to give urban children alternatives to substandard public schools. Championing emancipation from dependency by offering incentives and opportunities for minorities and the poor to free themselves from programs such as welfare and public housing. And 5, defending the rights of crime victims and ensuring the right to be free from crime. Because after all, as one of the organizers of the meeting said, minorities and the poor are far more likely to be victims of crime than other Americans. And so I want us to be clear that this is a vision statement, and I'm hoping we're working on some vision statements that we will work to actualize over the next 3 decades, because much of the policy language that has been directed at schools and universities through the 1990s and into the turn of the century was couched in the language of markets, competition, value-added models, disruption, innovation, declaring so-called government schools to be moribund and impervious to change. In the essay I referenced, Toni Morrison describes fascism as involving the conversion of all public services to private entrepreneurship. And in fact, that is what we are living with in many ways. So I think we have to contend with what happens when we declare things broken, rather than asking ourselves who broke it, with what tools. What we've seen is a pattern emerge in K-12 education in particular. First, the erosion of civil rights protections, de facto and de jure segregation, state disinvestment, political and institutional instability, white, middle class, and elite flight, market solutions enacted, and privatization. Charles Payne cautioned against the take-up of education reforms that purported to remedy the deficiencies in public education, writing, "Where disgust and impatience with the old system fed an uncritical search for alternatives and an uncritical disregard for everyone associated with the past, that disgust may actually help the old system reproduce itself in new forms, adorned with new rhetoric." This multi-partisan movement to remake education along market models feeds into the notion that institutions associated with public education are broken by association, including our field of educational research. The story sold about brokenness of public education made it easier to break things around it, including the National Center for Education Statistics, an agency that is over 150 years old and is now essentially shuttered. So we need new multidisciplinary frames to understand these dynamics, because on the surface they can seem justice-oriented and adopt language of the civil rights movement to advance policies and practices. Melamed wrote, "We often associate racial capitalism with the central features of white supremacist capital development, including slavery, colonialism, genocide, incarceration regimes, and migrant exploitation, and contemporary racial warfare. Yet we also increasingly recognize that contemporary racial capitalism deploys liberal and multicultural terms of inclusion to value and devalue forms of humanity differentially to fit the needs of reigning state capital orders." The anti-democratic practices we're seeing at scale in the federal government were first tested on K-12 schools through things like fiscal austerity, state takeovers, school closures, privatization, the rollback of desegregation enforcement, and disproportionate school discipline. Researchers like Domingo Morel and Rachel Williams have helped to illuminate how the rise of markets and privatization and school choice policies operate in the context of state dispossession, where minoritized people are both advocates for such policies and also opponents. As we look to repair, we must consider actors and organizations who work toward a vision of our democracy that was aimed at reversing civil rights gains and redefining what counts as civil rights. Education research has made that project complicated because data on these policies show that even when they provide individual opportunities, they often lead to greater segregation and inequality. Noting this evidence, McGuire and Whitka write, "The idea of a civic purpose for public schools has ebbed and flowed throughout history and is in urgent need of renewal at this time of rising polarization. Public schools that foster an appreciation for history and the skills and dispositions for citizenship must be a part of the long-term solution to the democratic challenges we face today. As we look to a future full of possibilities, we must envision human qualities for thriving that mirror those of democratic renewal, such as agency, empathy, curiosity, cooperation, critical thinking, and creative expression." Yep, Kent, you said that. So let's shift to thinking about renewal. So I returned to the Redwoods, specifically Muir Woods, the national park site I discussed at the beginning of the talk. On a visit to the park last summer, I was struck by a new, to me, information display called History Under Construction. The park, realizing that the way they commemorated the founding of Muir Woods erased the presence of indigenous peoples who stewarded the land, the women who had led conservation efforts, and details about the men who created the space did so out of eugenicist commitments. The new display asks visitors to consider how does knowing this more complete history change how they know this place and what that knowledge propels them to do? So I'll show you a close-up, you can see. So they didn't change the original timeline. What they did was try and make it more complete, to provoke people to stand in this beautiful space and understand the complexity within it. And the National Park Service says, research can unveil new information that challenges the conclusions we were previously confident in. We do active construction on the exhibits in the park, employing rigorous reevaluation to ensure they reflect up-to-date information and research. The process of revisiting timelines is a powerful way to critically ask what is absent from the story and what is missing. And as we examine the answers to these questions, we can start to understand how these stories we tell reflect who we are as a society. I just want to note that Octavia Butler, also, oh my gosh, also an author, I can't read my notes, so I'm going to go over here. So she says, I don't predict the future. I just basically look at what we're ignoring and project what it's going to look like 30 years from now, right? And so I also just want to bring in these griots who help us to see and make sense of what we are experiencing and how we can pay attention to what's happening. I just wanted to offer this because I shared so much depressing news. This is a tracker. This is a legislator tracker of states that have pro-LGBTQ plus legislation. So I think it's also important to look for the stories that we need to understand and know, and fundamentally to understand how it's happening and who's doing that, and what are the effects, right? So I think it holds for our field then as we think about how our research approaches have been somewhat incomplete and disconnected. And I want us to think about how research in the learning sciences, human development, measurement and evaluation, leadership and curriculum studies is situated in our current political economy. For example, we cannot think of the affordances of AI without the consideration of algorithmic injustice, intellectual property, surveillance, and environmental harms. Similarly, we often talk about the notion and practice of fugitivity in educational organizing and creating non-state spaces, and non-state spaces that honor community cultural wealth. But we also have to consider how modern tools of surveillance and carcerality and the tendency toward markets and individualism can disrupt those spaces. So I think we can only do this kind of thinking about the connections across multi-issues that affect education through collaborative research and debate. We can take seriously the study of resistance, refusal, and reimagining. We have so many historical lessons as well to draw from. The Chicano blowouts in 1968 in Los Angeles, the ongoing fight for ethnic studies in so many places around the country, student-led activism about gun control and gun violence, and the fight for rights of disabled students. Even within the most harmful ruptures, there are always efforts within communities to resist and engage in mutual aid and care. These lessons compel us to contend with loss, but to not stop our analysis at deficit. As Shri Prakash has argued, the lens of reparations not only asks us to actively recognize forms of injustice, it also asks what such injustice requires of us, how we should address it. There's so many examples from our field, I think, that are doing this good work of bringing together people across disciplines to think about complex issues. And I'm very proud that one of them is our new handbook on education policy research. You guys, Lori told me it weighs 8 pounds. It's over 1,800 pages, and it's a second edition. And what's really remarkable, I think the chapters are phenomenal. I know I'm biased, but almost all the chapters are multi-authored. There's almost no single authored chapters, and I think that's really the future of our field, is collaborative work, multi-authored work that brings together multiple ways of knowing. I also take inspiration from powerful frameworks that are emergent. The Lawyers' Committee for Civil Rights has called for the building of a third Reconstruction, for example. Youth-led movements like NY Integrate have developed a framework for equitable integration. And 3 states and several localities have passed measures to explore reparations for enslavement, which would involve both financial and educational approaches. In 2021, a report produced by the International Commission on the Futures in Education, the report mirrors Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which declares that education is a fundamental right and that students have the right to culture, the right to language, the right to science, and the right to evidence. Themes of interconnectedness and interdependence are central in this report, as is the health of the planet. In Colorado, the General Assembly created the Federal Indian Boarding School Research Program in the State Historical Society to conduct research regarding the physical abuse and deaths that occurred at federal Indian boarding schools in Colorado, and required Colorado, in consultation with the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Tribe, to develop recommendations to better understand the abuse that occurred and to support healing in tribal communities, providing $1 million through 2027 to the State Historical Society with the authority to carry forward any unexpended or unencumbered money at the end of the fiscal year. And with Amy Stewart Wells and our colleagues, we've embarked upon a project to speak back to the bans on teaching and learning with generous funding from the William T. Grant Foundation. We've called this project Public Learning for a Multiracial Democracy, Constructing a New Narrative. And we've brought together 4 groups to create research syntheses that will be usable and applicable for educators and lawyers who are trying to resist the bans on teaching and learning. And we had a session at this meeting that was just wonderful, and so we hope to have updates on this project very soon. But this is the kind of work I think we need to bring together researchers, to aggregate our knowledge, and to push for a new vision for how we are going to learn and live together. And I, as always, invoke one of my mentors and dear friends, Mike Rose, who encourages us to think about how we can engender public talk that links education to a more decent, thoughtful, and open society. Talk that raises in us, as a people, an appreciation for deliberation and reflection, or for taking intellectual risks and thinking widely, for the sheer power and pleasure of using our minds alone or in concert with others. These themes taken together fuse the cognitive and the civic, and ground the civic in specific obligations to the conditions of learning, and connect events in the classroom to a vision of both a knowledgeable and a good society. So I don't know what's going to happen in the coming days, months, and years, and neither do you. I know the anxiety and fear we feel is particularly acute for graduate students and early career researchers. All are negatively affected by the current federal and state actions. We must not cede who, and what we have been prepared to do as researchers directs us to do. And I think that involves a few things. We must stay curious. We must stay open. We must continue to theorize. We must continue to study. We must continue to engage and share what we know. This time will pass. Authoritarian and fascist states are not sustainable, though they can wreak significant damage and harm. And the resistance to the attacks on education, health, climate, and civil rights is strong and growing. AERA is part of this resistance. We will continue to fight. As you know, in collaboration with our allies and organizational partners we already have, the lawsuit that we filed with the Society for Research and Education on Educational Effectiveness is one example. In the meantime, we must find a way to do the research we know to be necessary and relevant. We will need to document the harms that are happening to students and educators and families and communities with the dismantling of federal research infrastructures. We're going to have to figure out how we will work together to collect data, to share data, to analyze data. Evidence of harm is critical in legal action, but it's also critical for truth-telling. And so we must also hold in our research gaze the strategies and collaborations in which people are engaging to resist and reimagine education that help students make sense of themselves and their communities, honor their curiosities, and help them to collaborate on solving big problems where disagreement and ambiguity characterize the situation. So more collaborative, multimodal, and integrative research approaches that start with value commitments about what we believe the role of education to be in a democratic society and how our research can help to achieve that is in order. I think we need to grapple as researchers with what it means to develop and sustain a robust form of civic education during democratic crisis. We also need more critical examinations of the forces who have long wanted to eradicate public education and how they have successfully whittled away at publication through the advancement of vouchers, neo-vouchers, the dismantling of school board governance, and the book bans and anti-LGBTQIA legislation that I mentioned. Attacks on higher education teaching are part and parcel of these efforts. Our research should help us make sense of this context, but also show how and where money matters, how governance matters, how teacher and leader expertise matters for the kind of civic education we claim we value. We teach students to care by teaching students with care. I think we need to show care in our research by refusing to ignore the difficult context under which students are being educated and instead incorporating this context into our research, theories, analyses, and recommendations. The theme of renewal is deeply intertwined in the life cycle of redwoods. These trees are known for their remarkable ability to regenerate after disturbances, such as wildfires. This natural process of renewal serves as a powerful metaphor for resilience and hope, even amid seemingly intractable challenges and powerful forces seeking to invalidate research and the pursuit of knowledge that refuses to ignore how policies, practices, and pedagogies have caused harm and have led to greater inequality, and have supported learning and thriving. I hope we can embrace the principles of renewal within our own research community, that we can cultivate a mindset that prioritizes sustainability and environmental stewardship, civil rights, healthy human development across the lifespan. We can ensure that the new data systems we develop and build are much more comprehensive and inclusive of the human experience. Through the collaborative research and curiosity, we can realize a vibrant research context in which our multiple ways of conducting inquiry complement and contribute to a much more holistic understanding of pressing questions. We can continue to learn from educational historians and philosophers and those who offer us artistic expression, areas that are critical to this holistic understanding, but do not have immediate application to policy, practice, or pedagogy. We can ensure that everyone has access to the fundamental humanizing experience of being a well-educated person in the world who understands their connections and obligations to others and to the planet. The lessons learned from Redwoods can inspire us to renew our commitment to protecting our planet for future generations and to ensuring that our field continues to offer research and evidence that makes robust learning for and in a multiracial democracy possible, even as we take care to ensure that our research does not do further harm. Like the Redwoods, may our research be intertwined, robust, mutually sustaining, contributing to a diverse, healthy, and vibrant ecosystem that supports and commits to a compromised and battered, but still possible, democratic society where everyone's knowledge and life and potential and thriving matter. Thank you.